you cannot make networking about you. Networking is a two-way street for hiring managers. You have to understand it's all about how do you make it easy for them to say yes to you. And the way that I approach this, especially with hiring managers, is
one of my favorite pieces of content from you. I still remember the video frame for frame because it was so impactful on my own career.
You literally go to LinkedIn search bar and you put hiring, and then you enclose on quotation mark the title that you're looking for. You're going to be able to see that people are still putting things like, I'm hiring, my team is hiring, we are hiring.
You were one of the first I saw with tactical steps on who to reach out and how to reach out to hiring managers. Can you talk about how candidates can get in the front door?
If you give them exactly what they're looking for, it is very easy for them to say,
welcome to today's episode of the Product Growth Podcast. Thanks for being here, Diego.
Aakash, thank you so much for inviting me. It's always a pleasure to be with you.
So Diego and I have known each other for 3.5 years now. And if you haven't seen him online, he's an AI PM at Google. He's been an AI PM since it was cool. He was an AI PM at LinkedIn, Microsoft, and Cisco. Before that, he got his MBA at Duke, his master's in CS at GA Tech, and worked as a BI consultant. Today, we're going to break down all the elements of getting your next PM job. Where I want to start is, you were one of the first I saw with tactical steps on who to reach out to and how to reach out to hiring managers. Can you talk about how candidates can get in the front door with hiring managers?
Yeah, one of the things to understand when it comes to reaching out to people, especially hiring managers, recruiters, basically anybody that you're looking for a job, is you have to understand that, well, yes, it's about you and finding a job. You cannot make networking about you. Networking is a two-way street. Networking is something where you have to, offer something to people, whether it's something as simple as giving them an article that you think will be interesting to them, giving them, an opportunity to learn something new. There has to be some exchange. I know it sounds like an awful word to say when you're looking for a job, because this is of course not about bribing anyone. It's more about you need to give people something, even if it's a meaningful coffee chat. But you have to give them something. So specifically for hiring managers, you have to understand a couple things. One, they're don't have time to do a lot of recruitment for you. That's what recruiters are for. Number two, whenever they find themselves on LinkedIn, you have to be very concise, very clear on your ask. It's all about how do you make it easy for them to say yes to you. And the way that I approach this, especially with hiring managers, is you have to give them exactly what they're looking for. You go and read the job description and you see, okay, am I a good fit for this role? And the answer has to be yes. The answer has to be yes, I am qualified for this role. And once you discover that, then you have to give them, in a very concise and short message, a reason why they should say yes to you. Meaning you offer evidence that you are the right fit, that you have experience, that you have, think of the job description as a cheat sheet. They're giving you an exam. You have the cheat sheet. Now you have to answer. And if you give those things to the hiring manager, we can get into a lot more details about, crafting a message and all of that. But if you give them exactly what they're looking for, it is very easy for them to say yes, because I don't have time to go through messages that just ask for a random coffee chat or, hey, can you tell me more about the job? It's all about giving them that very specific experience, make it a yes for them. And that's part of just to going back to this idea of it's a two-way street when it comes to networking. You have to give them the evidence, make it easy for them. They have a need, you have the solution. It's not about, hey, can you give me a job? It's about, hey, I have the evidence that I have the skills and the experience that you're looking for. So I'm going to make it easier for you to go through the process by telling you I'm the person that you're looking for. And then there's a whole company process that goes behind the scenes, right? When you apply, but at least to the hiring managers, it's all about making it easy for them to say yes.
Is your product team having trouble in capturing the true voice of customers? That's because user feedback is scattered across channels, making it nearly impossible to catch crucial conversations. It's time you're able to centralize your voice of customer from everything like your CRM, customer portals, call recordings, or even public reviews. That's where Zeta.io comes in, our podcast partner today. With Zeta's AI, you can plug your customer conversations in, and it will allow you to easily slice and dice these into actionable insights for your key product areas so that you can do more to improve NPS scores, analyze features, identify new features, or perhaps understand why you lost a few deals. This paves the way for planning the right features and channeling your efforts into actually planning and building your roadmap to finally close that loop 10 times faster. Product managers around the world use Zeta.io and use it to really improve their product discovery. It's plug and play in just minutes. So visit zeta.io/LPS/Aakash Gupta to get an extra 10% off. One of my favorite pieces of content from you, I still remember the video frame for frame because it was so impactful on my own career. We're talking probably before I even met you. This is probably around 4 years ago. So what you showed in this video is you go to your LinkedIn search and you search the title of the job that you're looking for. And what does LinkedIn show you? It shows you like people who have that title. It shows you that job description. No, you said filter to posts. And then what you do, what do you find? You find hiring managers who are posting about that job. And then you go reach out to them because they've actually showed that they're interested in looking for people on LinkedIn. I loved that tactic. How did you come about that tactic? And is it still effective 4 years later?
When I was at Cisco, this was 2018, probably early 2019, I started to look for a new job. I wanted to get out of the networking industry. And one of the things that I realized is that I was applying to jobs and I was getting calls for things related to networking, things related to routers and switches and access points and things that I didn't necessarily want to do anymore. I didn't want to leave Cisco to join another Cisco. I wanted to try something else. And so I realized that, yes, I studied an MBA. I thankfully have a big network, made a lot of friends, and they were all willing to help me with a referral. It was never, quote unquote, fast enough. It was always something where you have a referral and then you have to wait, all eternity until something happens. In most cases, sometimes it's pretty fast. And so I realized that on my feed, on LinkedIn feeds, a lot of people were using very specific keywords that we say them all the time, especially hiring managers. And I realized that was something. It became a thing on LinkedIn. People use a combination of words hiring and then the job that they're looking for. And so if, like you said, you literally go to LinkedIn search bar and you put hiring and then you enclose on quotation mark the title that you're looking for, you're going to be able to see that people are still putting things like, I'm hiring, my team is hiring, we are hiring for the job that you're looking for. And then you can play with the filters for LinkedIn to say, I want people who are from these very specific companies. And that's going to give you sometimes, not all the time, sometimes results for people from that specific company hiring for positions that you're looking for. Is it relevant still 4 years later? Absolutely. And I've come up with a few other techniques, but I think that one is, I would say, one of the more relevant. Probably the only time where you didn't see that happening was 2023, early 2023, when all the layoffs happened. That was probably the only time where maybe that wouldn't be something that you would, be common and you come across. But in most cases, absolutely, I think it's still pretty relevant.
Awesome. And sort of, as you mentioned, there are more techniques. One of the techniques I've started to look at, because I talk to a lot of people who are interested in startups, especially a lot of AI startups are hiring right now, is just search the word hiring, filter for posts, and then filter for current company of that post. At least you'll figure out who the hiring managers throughout that company are. And what do hiring managers tend to do? If you reach out to them about one job, they'll forward it to the relevant hiring manager if they're not the hiring manager for that other job. But you get that signal that they're active on LinkedIn because they've made a post. So I feel like the genius in your strategy was filtering for posts.
And one thing that is very you have to keep in mind as you use this technique is there's two, and we're getting into the specifics of LinkedIn, but there's two very distinct but very impactful filters in this strategy. You can filter by industry, by company industry, and you can filter by where the author works. And the one that you want to filter is where the author works, because if you filter by the company's industry and you just say, oh, I want to, Microsoft, it's going to try to get posts from Microsoft, not from the people who work at Microsoft. So you want to filter for where people work. And it's literally a filter that goes all the way at the bottom. But that's what's going to give you what you said is going to be relevant, because then you'll find the people at these startups. But yeah, I think people underestimate LinkedIn and underestimate the things that you can do. LinkedIn gives you, very basic tools, so to speak, gives you feed, gives you filters, gives you people. But when you start playing with some of these techniques, like you said, filtering for hiring, looking for the specific people, looking for who's active and sending them different kinds of messages, it becomes really powerful, not just for getting a job, but for networking and for literally growing, whether it's, your friends, your group of friends, your group of colleagues, or, who knows, possible investors and possible, co-founders. And LinkedIn is a beautiful tool, I would say.
Yeah, it wasn't until I became VP of product at a contact database, Apollo, that I realized I had always had access to the world's best contact database my entire life. LinkedIn. It's actually crazy that in 2024, you have something like 950 million tech profiles just up to date with people. You get to know what their titles are, where they work, often where they work in terms of location. So it's one of the most powerful tools out there. So one of the things that you had mentioned was that there's some intricacies around hiring manager versus recruiter. Can you kind of crack open that in several layers of detail for us? For instance, I know there's differences at smaller versus larger companies. Can you kind of help us understand the full landscape of when should we be reaching out to a potential hiring manager versus a recruiter, and how do their roles vary?
You mentioned one key thing here, which is when you're reaching out to startups, typically you're looking for the founders, the co-founders, or someone who's in that early stages, regardless of the title, someone that is close to the founders, because at that stage you may or may not have someone specific for recruiting. You may have just the hiring managers. There's always nuances. And so at that stage, if you're going for those early startup, you have to find literally the founders and like you said, approach them and pitch them an idea and try to get into that circle by doing your networking. As you grow in terms of size of the company that you're looking for, the roles and responsibilities become much more clear. There's going to be recruiters, and I'm definitely, I've never been a recruiter, but I have recruiter friends who they are the ones that are always scouting for new people to join the company, and they're the ones reviewing resumes, and they're the ones looking at the ATS, and so their main role, or one of their main functions in this role, is to literally source people, and so at that stage in those larger companies, one of the things to think about when you reach out to them is you have to make a very clear distinction. If you find the recruiters, which, by the way, could be hard, just because the recruiters doesn't mean they recruit for all the types of roles, and we'll talk about that in a moment. But when you reach out to them, I see the biggest mistake that people do is they think that the recruiter's job is to get you, the person who reached out, a job. And that's not the role. The role is to fill a position. And they're looking for very specific positions in very specific teams, working with very specific hiring managers. So the mistake that I see most people do is when they reach out to recruiters, they're like, hey, I'm looking for a role. Can you help me? Or, hey, I saw, 10 jobs on your company's website. Can you please, add me to the interview list to one of them? Or, some of the worst ones that I've seen is like, hey, here's my resume. Please let me know if you have a job. It's like, no, it goes back to the first thing that I was saying is this is about an exchange. You can't simply go and ask people, hey, please do something for me. That's it. If you're going to help recruiters, and I'll talk in a moment about how to find the ones or try to find the ones that are actively hiring for a role. If you're going to reach out to recruiters, you have to make their lives easier. You have to help them on their job. And this goes back to the same thing that I was saying earlier, is you go and look at the job description, you apply to a job, you see that you're qualified for the job. And qualified means all the job descriptions have a basic or required or minimum qualifications, and you make sure that you qualify for those. Then you go to the recruiter and you say, hey, I'm looking for this job. I applied. Here's the evidence that I'm a great fit. In different countries have different rules. In the US, what I've learned, and again, I'm not a recruiter, but this is what I learned from my friends in recruiting, is that you don't have to send them your resume. Part of it, I think there's some legal implications that I honestly don't know enough about, but I do know that if you tell them, hey, I applied, my resume is in your system, they can download it from there. So to recruiters, you have to literally go and say, hey, here's why I'm a great fit. The nuance here is that you may find recruiters that are not recruiting for your role. So then what do? And so to make that a helpful conversation, you can still reach out to them and say, hey, I applied to this role. Here's the evidence of why I'm a great fit for this role. Please help me to get in contact with the right team. Please pass my resume along. Please pass my LinkedIn profile along to the right team, to the hiring team. And then, very unfortunately, this is also a little bit of a luck involved in here. And so you may end up with recruiters who do pass your resume or your LinkedIn profile along to someone else. Or you may find someone who they may not be as active, and we're talking about LinkedIn, they may not be as active on LinkedIn so they don't see your message. But the point is that when you find recruiters, you have to make their lives easier. You have to tell them why you're reaching out and basically how to say yes to you. Hiring managers, I feel there's a little bit of a small difference here. The recruiter's job is to basically help fill the position, among many other things that recruiters do, but one of them is fill the position. The hiring manager, that's not their main job. They don't spend all the time reading messages. They don't spend all the time searching for candidates. Sometimes they post and they forget about it. So when you reach out to hiring managers, your job is, again, not to say, hey, can we jump in a call? Can you help me understand the role? Can you help me see if I'm a good fit? No, your role in that situation is you have to think that the hiring manager doesn't have time, certainly doesn't have time for you, certainly doesn't have time to be recruiting. And so the more concise, short, and the more value you add to a hiring manager in the form of, again, not just your qualifications, but the why you're interested in the role, why that specific role, why now, why are you trying to make that switch, and give them the evidence, and most of all, be respectful. And what I mean by that is that in some cases, hiring managers will post something like, hey, here's a job post, please go and apply, don't message me. Then being respectful also helps. And I get it, especially in tech, a lot of people are like, type A, hungry for that, and I'm just going to do everything. But you also have to have a little bit of respect in this entire process. Remember, networking is not about you. It's an exchange. It's a two-way street. The fact that you don't get a job right now, but if you meet someone along the way, that someone can then help you later on to get your next job. So honestly, treat networking with care, in the sense that don't just go asking for things. Treat it with respect. That's what I would say. Treat networking with respect.
Okay. So we've really focused in on outreach to recruiters and to hiring managers. I would say this is just one of many, many strategies to apply to a job. Just looking at your resume, my guess is one of the tactics that's worked well for you is getting people to reach out to you. Another tactic that often works well is getting a referral, which we've briefly talked about. Another tactic that can work for some people is customizing their resume, writing a stellar cover letter, and dropping it into the ATS. Another approach that I sometimes see for people is creating a work product that they try to email out to folks. So there's like a litany of different strategies. If you think about the universe of strategies, especially those ones I mentioned, plus the LinkedIn outreach that we just covered in depth, how would you rank those? How should people be thinking about approaching a job? What's number one? What's number two? What's number three? What's the order of operations for best to worst to apply to a PM job?
That is a great question, because you're absolutely right. I think I've seen all these techniques, and I've seen all kinds of approaches to getting that next PM job. Let me start by saying that I don't think this is a situation where, there's one size that fits all situations. That being said, I do believe there are better strategies, and I'll explain why. One of the things, one of my personal principles in when I'm applying to a job, whenever I'm looking for a new job, is at the end of the process, I have to be comfortable and confident that I did everything that I could that was in my power. Meaning, if I can go to bed and I can sleep well, knowing that I did everything, then I think that I did a good job. What that means is that, and I did this especially when I was in my MBA, is, hey, the job is asking for a cover letter. Is anybody going to read it? I have no idea. Will it make me feel better knowing that I did everything I could and I wrote a cover letter even if nobody is going to read it? For me, the answer is yes. So then I wrote it. I have no idea if it worked or not, but I could go to bed and say, yes, I applied with everything I could. So let me start from the bottom. I think techniques that definitely I don't recommend, and I get why people do it. I don't recommend doing like a presentation on here's how I would improve. Let's take LinkedIn as an example, and I explain why. Here's how we should improve LinkedIn, and then go and find PMs and give it to them and be like, hey, look at I can be a PM. Here's a presentation. And the biggest reason for that is I never had time to read them, and if I could, there was almost nothing I could do about it. And the biggest reason for that is that none of those improvements were things that I was working on or that I was concerned about. And then you could say, well, why didn't you find the right team and gave them the presentation? We go back to the principle. I'm not a hiring manager, but if hiring managers don't have time to go and do all the hiring process, and that's what recruiters are helping with, then product managers also don't have time to go and do some of that heavy lifting of finding the right PM, finding the right people for you. And this is not about, hey, PMs are selfish and therefore they didn't do it. Is PMs just don't have time to complete their things. Now you're asking them to do one more stuff. And I'll be honest, I don't even know if there's any legal implications on, taking that, grabbing some ideas, implementing. I actually had so one person said, here's a presentation, here's how to improve LinkedIn by doing X. I hope it's helpful to the team. And by the way, I do expect credit for this idea. And I was like, dude, that's not necessarily how this works. Thank you for reaching out, but that's not how it works. And so, listen, doing presentations, I think, is a fantastic way to elevate your product sense skills and preparing for the journey into product management or into your next PM role. But improving an existing product, it's going to be hard. I'm not saying it never works. I'm just saying the odds of it working are very, very low. So I wouldn't recommend that one. The second thing that I wouldn't recommend, if I go from bottom to top, is just mass applying, having one resume and then just, either being in these websites where they apply for you with the same resume, or they look at your resume and it's like, oh, don't worry, we'll find your fit, and here's 50,000 roles that we applied for you. And the biggest reason is that tailoring is not just about adding keywords. It's about showing how in your resume you have an accomplishment. Hey, I accomplished X by doing Y and measure it by Z. It's all about showing that you have the relevant experience, not just throwing roadmap into one of your random accomplishments. It's about showing how you use something to create a roadmap that then evolved into something else that helped the team. And by doing that tailoring, you're demonstrating that you're a great fit for the role. So if you mass apply, the problem is that for every job that you don't tailor your resume to, somebody else did. And that someone else will have more chances to have the resume picked up because they will be more relevant to the job. So maybe many years ago, it was a numbers game and you just mass apply. Even before, the whole COVID thing. Sure, companies like Amazon and Microsoft and big tech, they were in a hiring spree even during COVID, and you could, apply and somebody would pick up and be like, yes, let's interview you. But now that reality has changed, at least for a while, it has changed. You cannot have the luxury of just mass applying and waiting on results. So that's, the number two that I don't recommend. And then, starting to go into, okay, so what do I recommend from bottom to top? Definitely tailoring. Tailoring is one of the things that I do recommend. Like I said, it's all about showing, hey, I've got relevant skills. I have the experience. I'm looking for this. A lot of people come to me and say, hey, Diego, I don't have time to tailor everything. My recommendation is tailored to specific types of roles or technology. For example, I tailor one of my resumes for AI and machine learning, another one for growth, and I applied to those types of roles. And then, I had a third category where it was a hybrid of those two and be like, all right, this is a cool job. I may not be 100% fit, but, who knows? Let's just apply. Then if you can accompany that with referrals, great. The problem with referrals, and we can go deep into that, is that as employees, we have a questionnaire to fill, and a referral is not just a check mark that says, yes, I do recommend this person. Great. They ask us questions about how well we know you, how we work with you, so on and so forth. So great if you can have a referral, but it's okay if you don't have one. And then continuing to the top, to me, networking. Networking is always king, and it's not because you knew the person. When I came to the US in 2015, I knew absolutely no one in the industry. I knew no one in any company. And I built a huge network mostly because of networking. So networking and everything we've discussed, reaching out to hiring managers, reaching out to recruiters, to me, that is the best way in which you can find your next role. Let me just make one last comment about networking. You can always network with other product managers and try to get those referrals. And I believe in the power of networking with other PMs to learn more about how they landed their job, how they change industries, how, what is it like to work at those companies. But keep in mind that this takes it tends to be a long process. And if the position has been open, I prefer to network with PMs to learn more about the company, but I still network with recruiters and hiring managers to try to get my foot in the door by giving them the evidence of, again, here's why I'm a great fit for this role. So again, from bottom to top on best techniques at the end, to me, networking is the best way, and the worst ways, and again, doesn't mean that it doesn't work. It's just the chances are very low, is to create presentations on products that already exist and try to send it to any product manager that you know at that company. In my experience, it doesn't really work well.
Okay, awesome. So we started to talk a little bit about the resume, and we talked about how you customize the resume based on the experiences. You might have different resumes for different industries. I think that's good advice, but I want to actually step back a little bit more because you have one of the most viral posts I've ever seen on LinkedIn. It has more than 30,000 likes. It's a post on resumes, and you color code and you box various parts of the real resume you used to get a PM job at Microsoft. So can you kind of help people understand what were those color codings about? What were the main lessons in that post? Because I think those are the basics of resumes. If you don't even have those basics, it doesn't matter how much you're customizing.
One of the things that I've learned in this journey of creating content on LinkedIn is that sometimes things are seen and heard multiple times, but the more you break it down into chunks that is easy to digest, easy to understand, easy to follow, it's not just about virality. It's about, is it going, say, viral for your audience, for the people that you want to talk to. And in my case, it was for people who were looking for a job. And the color coding was just a way to tell people, hey, there's basic rules about a resume that you need to follow, especially in the US. And I'm from Mexico, and in Mexico and many places in Latin America, it's mostly the same. And you know, advice may change slightly from country to country, but there are very basic things about a resume that I believe at least everybody should follow. And this is part of the color coding. One is that your resume has to have a structure that, for example, in the US is very common to say, hey, things should start with, you know, a verb in past tense, but more than the verb being in past tense is about, it's a verb that has to be relevant. If I'm a product manager, I need to tell stories, about accomplishments that are about, I'm going to lead teams. I'm going to develop initiatives. I'm going to, synthesize data or analyze data about the market, about users, about something. And so one of the color codings is you have to make things relevant and have some order and structure in with verbs in the past. The other kind of color coding that I had, which is again another principle, is trying to have as much as possible as many numbers or impact as you can in your resume. Not everything will have an impact, but thinking about what was the impact of this and how can I quantify this really shows that you understand, here's the project that I did, here's how I did it, and here's how I know that this was an important project. And listen, unless your numbers are, I improved this by 100 million%, the recruiters and hiring managers are not necessarily going to care if it was 5 million or 15 million, or if you did this in 20% or 35%. Is more about, do you understand how this accomplishment is relevant to the role, relevant to your organization, and impactful to whatever your goal was at the time. So having impact, having a number, sometimes it's not even a number, it's about half, double, triple, whatever, simply highlighting what was that impact to the organization. So that's the second one. And then a third one about this color coding and these principles is the fact that you make it relevant, again, not just with keywords in the sense of as a product manager throwing roadmap and throwing strategy and vision into your resume, which plenty of people do. In fact, most people that I've seen the resume, they have a section that says skills, and it just says leadership, communication, roadmap, strategy, vision, and every single product manager keyword, thinking that it will help them with the ATS, but in reality, it doesn't help with anything at all. So the relevancy about those keywords is, can you tell me about things that you did as a product manager that are relevant to the job that we're posting, and that have an impact in the organization? In other words, is three things. A, you should look at the job description and see what they're asking for. B, you should write an accomplishment relevant to that is related to product management. And C, try to quantify it, try to show that you have an impact on that. So if you decided on the strategy of a product, tell about why was that relevant, why was creating the strategy relevant to the team or to the company, and how did you accomplish that strategy, meaning what kind of data did you use, what kind of research did you started, what kind of competitor market analysis study you did, is how did you come up with that strategy, and then what was the impact of creating that strategy. So I think the post, going back to your question, I think the post went viral because a lot of people that go into creating the resume, they mostly believe that if I use a website that with AI, it tells me I have X score, or if, some family or friend who's not in the industry who did the resume 10 years ago reviews it and says, yes, looks good, makes sense, who pay, $200, $500, $1,000 to a company to rewrite the resume, they're like, yes, I'm sold. I like it. Let's apply with this. They come to my post and they see that resumes, and I break it down in a easy way to consume. Resumes is all about just paying attention to, here's what they're asking for. Here's the evidence that I have what they're asking for. And I'm writing it in a way that is easy for recruiters and hiring managers to understand. That is the formula of tailoring. That there's nothing magic behind this. There's no reason why a consultant should charge you $1,500 to make your resume. If you have the skills, just write them in a way that is easy for somebody else to understand that you have the skills. And so that's why I think the post went super viral. Is like 40,000 likes. Like that never happened before. So it was my viral moment, my one and only viral moment.
Definitely not only, but one of many just so impactful posts for people. And I just want to double click on one piece of advice that Diego mentioned there, which I think a lot of PMs in particular get wrong. Metrics that are relevant to the role. So an exercise I like to do after looking at a job description is I try to say like, okay, what is probably their OKRs for next quarter? Because you know what a hiring manager wants? They want somebody who can move those OKRs. Like even think about the magnitude. I know you mentioned that they don't care that much about the magnitude because it varies so wildly company to company. At LinkedIn and at Microsoft, it's probably easier to make a $5 million impact than at a small little startup. But still think about the magnitude. If they're trying to move first-time activation rates, what's a typical activation rate? Well, it's often like 10%. So if you can move it from like 10 to 15%, like it's just like, it's going to be a game changer for the business. So if you've done that in the past, and that's a likely OKR, and if you can explain that, that's what customization looks like. And that's what a good metric looks like.
You just mentioned one very important thing, which is, when it comes to saying things like, hey, I accomplished, activation or increase activation by X%, that could be such an incredible accomplishment for you. But if it's not an accomplishment that is relevant to the role, it's going to be hard to convince the hiring managers and the recruiter first of all, that you have the relevant experience. What I mean by that is that if I'm applying to an AI and machine learning role, and I talk much more about activations, and I talk much more about growth, and I talk much more about UX, and I talk much more about something that is not AI and machine learning, those could be fantastic accomplishments for me, but they will hardly convince the hiring manager that I have the AI and machine learning skills to do the job. And I know that this could be a technical versus non-technical easy comparison, but it actually applies to everything. If you're applying for a role that has to do with a lot of onboarding tasks and how to improve the sign-up process and how to improve the onboarding and how to increase retention and how to increase all of that, and suddenly you're talking in your resume about growth or just about how to implement a platform and how to implement APIs, it's not going to be very relevant. Even if you think that is the most crazy, innovative thing I've ever done in my job, if it's not relevant to them, it's not going to be the thing that is going to get you an interview or the thing that is going to get you the job. So I think you brought up a great point with that, which is think about those OKRs and think about, okay, how would they measure success? And you will not have the right answer, but at least you can try to identify, are they going to measure things in the team for this role in terms of anything related to APIs, which is the awesome example of accomplishment that I have, or are they going to be measuring things related to activation? And if the answer is activation, doesn't mean that you have to completely delete everything about APIs, but you have to center your resume around activations and not so much about APIs in this example.
Love it. I think I need to do like just a whole newsletter post on this concept you mentioned of it's not what's most hard for you to have accomplished or from your eyes most impactful. It's what's most relevant to that job. And I would say 99.99% of candidates I talk to have not internalized this advice fully. Interviews, they'll bring up stories about cost when the job is about revenue. And it's like, huh? Or they'll start talking about like support tickets and the job is about growth. It's like, those are totally different. So that's a really, really important lesson. Staying on the theme of the resume for a little bit longer, a lot of people have this summary section at the top of their resumes. We've already dissed the skills section. We've said toss that. What about this summary section?
When I see a resume with a summary section, the first thing that I tell the other person is, hey, I have not read it, but I bet I'm 99% sure that if I take your name out of your resume and put my name or anybody else's in product management, anybody else's name in there, I bet that your summary can apply to any of us. And 99% of the time, the answer is yes, because it's the most generic thing in the world. It's like experienced product leader who has experience in strategy and vision and innovation and leading products to blah, 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 whatever other keywords. And I'm like, that doesn't tell me or anyone anything about who you are, about why you're applying, about anything. So my advice is very simple in this case. If you want to keep a summary, which there's nothing wrong with keeping it, I think it does help. But if you want to keep a resume, make it relevant. We go back to the same thing. When I applied to AI and machine learning roles, my summary was about, hey, I have X years of experience in AI and machine learning in these technologies. I have a master's in science and computer science by Georgia Tech, specialized in machine learning. I have experience with Python and with this and with that and with blah, 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 whatever relevant or related to machine learning. So if you do want to keep a summary, make sure that it's relevant. The caveat there is that you have to think that every time you have a summary, you have to also tailor that to the job that you're applying to. So the more sections you add to your resume, the more you have to tailor. It doesn't mean that if you don't have a summary, you're out of the process. It doesn't mean that. It just means that everything, absolutely everything on your resume, or as much as possible to not be extremist, it has to be relevant. If you put a summary, make it relevant.
And then the other hot topic within resumes is 1-page versus 2-page or even 3-page resumes. What are your thoughts on those?
I know I'm going to sound like a broken record, but the more relevant, the better. What that means is that if you can make it relevant in 1 page or in 2 pages or in 3 pages, that's awesome. But what I see people do is they put all kinds of irrelevant accomplishments and summaries and keywords that ends up being 3 pages of almost nothing, because I say almost because only a few things end up becoming relevant. And so again, if you're applying to a role that has to do with growth or revenue or whatever it is, and they don't care about APIs, don't stuff your resume with API things. Mention it maybe once or twice, but don't write everything about it. Typically, I would say for students and someone with, say, less of 10 years of total experience, regardless of whether it's PM or not, but if you have a combined experience of 10 years, typically 1 page tends to be enough. Beyond that, too, it's fine. And I know that PhDs and others have publications and stuff that goes into 3 pages or more. But the whole point of this is that you have to make it relevant. If you don't make it relevant, it doesn't matter how many pages you have. That also gets into a tricky situation, which is a lot of people also want to use this flashy, or sometimes expensive because they buy them, templates, which is like with colors and graphs and this and that. Is like recruiters don't care about those things. So don't use anything overcomplicated that will make your resume at 2 pages long just because you have graphs and icons and stuff like that. Something very, very plain and simple works. It's all about how relevant is your resume. So, again, student, less than 10 years, 1-2 pages maximum. If you have 10 years, typically 2 pages tends to be okay.
All right. Let's move on to how to prepare for interviews. What are the best ways to prepare? I think there's so many things. So maybe let's kind of, again, rank them, and we can go bottom up or top down, whatever you think. But, the things that I see, one is reading books. I'm going to buy Cracking the PM Interview, and I'm going to buy Lewis Lynn's excellent book, Dakota and Conquer. Maybe I'll even buy Akash's book, and I'll buy Diego's course, and I'll buy Bart's course. Okay, so I've bought a bunch of stuff, and I'm just going to consume content. Another tactic is I'm going to practice content. So I'm going to go out there, and I'm just going to read these example questions, and I'm going to give my answer. Another tactic is I'm going to go find peers. I'm going to go look into my class, and we're going to create groups, and we're going to mock interview each other. Another tactic is I'm going to pay for expensive coaches, and they're going to mock interview me and feedback to me. So basically, there's a million things you could do in order to prepare. What are the best ways?
I swear that this is going to be relevant. Many years ago, in another life, I was a part-time teacher, math teacher. I taught math at 7 in the morning, which you can imagine it's painful for students. Not necessarily for me, but for students, it's painful. I was younger, way younger, and very quickly I realized in my first semester that what I taught at 7:05 would click for 40% of the students. And then another 20 later after the class would be like, hey, I have 3 questions, and then we'll get it. And then the rest were like, I'm completely lost. Like, I have no clue what's going on. And then I started to understand that, the more I repeated things to them, the less they understood. They were at some point they were like, cool, great, love it. And then they would just go out of the classroom and then, they just never understood what the heck happened at 7 in the morning. And very quickly I realized that it was not because math was hard, which it is, but at that time it was not because it was hard. It was because everybody had such a very different, unique way of learning that I had to teach the same thing in 3, 4, sometimes even 5 different ways. At that point, it became relevant to me that it was not about the student. It was not about math. It was about how the student learned. And the reason I shared that little bit of a story is because I think the worst advice I've seen out there is like, hey, here's all the articles, here's all the posts, here's all the books, here's all the videos. And if you read these 10 videos, if you read these 10 books, and if you watch these 50 videos, and then if you do everything, absolutely everything at the same time, you'll be golden. And I'm like, that doesn't work, because for some people, they need to read things to understand. For others, they need to practice. For others, they need to watch videos. For others, they need to pay for someone. For others, it's a mix of everything. So I think everything you mentioned, I think all of that is amazing advice. What I would put on top of that is not necessarily which one is better or worse. It's more about what works for you as someone who's preparing for interviews. If you know, and I'll be very, very blunt in this, for me, reading doesn't work. Every time I bought any book in terms of interview preparation, it doesn't matter how easy as tell me about yourself or how complex as here's this very cryptic interview question, I read the book and I was like, I have a million questions. How the heck did you get to this answer? How do I prepare to get to an answer like this? Like, it just doesn't work for me. And so I had to look for other different things, like a mix of videos and podcasts and asking people, because that worked for me. Whereas for others, they're like, Diego, I try to watch videos, but I get distracted in 10 seconds. But when I read, I go deep into that and I understand it and I can apply a framework. So it's like, great. And so my advice on top of, videos and blogs and podcasts and books and articles and everything is there's no one best source for any of this. It's all about what works for you. And I've read all kinds of posts about, here's my interview prep guide for whatever random company. And it's all about, here's my journey. And I did 450 mock interviews and I read 5 books and I'm like, that's awesome, but that doesn't work for me. Like, I cannot do that. And people then get stressed and they come to me like, Diego, do I have to do like 450 mock interviews? And I'm like, no, chill. That worked for that person. You have to figure out what works for you. So the more time you spend, and this is I would say the advice, the more time you spend searching for the best resource, for the one resource, for what are those, golden tickets to these are the best things, the less time you will actually spend preparing. So if you're the kind of person that reads, go for books. If you're the kind of person that needs someone to be talking to, go for podcasts, go for YouTube videos, go for paid courses. But you have to find your own style and trust, assuming that it's a high quality, that you can trust the source, trust in the process more so than trying to find that what next thing. Because there's no everybody who's going to help you get into product management or get you your next product management role. We all talk about similar things in different ways for how people learn in different styles and forms. We don't have a magic formula. There's no magic formula in here. It's all about different styles of teaching and different styles of learning. So I know it was kind of a slightly different answer to ranking, right? But it did teach me a lesson when I was a math teacher, learning that concept and then realizing that it's not about one size fits all. It's all about how different learning and teaching techniques are going to help people, whether it's to land their next job or to be better in product management altogether. Love
it. Pedagogy, what works, so different depending on the person. One tactic that I tend to give the advice that this is my favorite tactic. So I want to hear your honest take. Feel free to tell me I'm wrong. Is I think going to, for instance, your YouTube channel, where there are a lot of mock interviews from somebody who has worked at big tech, and doing the interview alongside them. So basically pausing the interview before Diego speaks or his guest Alex or whoever speaks and giving your response and then comparing it. I find that active form of participation, and ideally recorded, so that you can actually look back at it and you can see how many ums and ahs and how you came off on camera versus how they came off on camera. That to me is kind of like the God tier technique. Like once you get the basics down, once you've bought the courses, and I do actually recommend you buy those courses. If you want to go buy the $1,500 Product Alliance one, go ahead. If you want to buy the couple $100 Diego one, go ahead. If you want to buy the really cheap Aakash one, go ahead. Like it doesn't really matter which one you buy. They're all very trusted sources. The production quality goes up as you pay more. But once you get the basics, for me, it's about recording yourself and comparing yourself to a reference.
Let me add one thing to that. And it's more of a little bit of a word of caution, just for one small thing there. First of all, I agree. I think going into YouTube and finding a mock interview video and then pausing in, trying it yourself, and then seeing the answer, I think is fantastic. If you record it yourself, I think it's even better. The one word of caution that I would put there is, especially as you are starting to prepare for interviews, and it doesn't matter for which role, it doesn't matter for which style, it doesn't matter if it's your first or your 10th role. If you're just starting to prepare and you give an answer, and the interviewee in that video gives a very different, distinct answer, there's a point when you're going to be like, oh, am I wrong? Like, what are all the wrong things that I did, right? Because you don't get that feedback. So my recommendation is don't just do one, because if you do one or two or maybe three, you're going to get that bias from the video and be like, oh, I'm so bad at this because, I didn't do X, Y, Z. But the problem with that is that you don't know if the interview in the video is good or not. And that is the biggest challenge for me. So you have to do a lot of this, say 10, 20, ideally. I don't even know how many videos exist on YouTube about mock interviews. But if you do a lot of them, then you have a good sample to say, okay, I can start to understand which ones are good or at least better than if you just do one or two. So that would be the only thing that I would add to that advice.
This episode is brought to you by Adio, the next generation CRM. Imagine a world where your CRM is powerful, easily configured, and actually intuitive. Adio makes that a reality. As I've profiled in the Product Growth newsletter, setting up Adio takes less than a minute, and within seconds of syncing your email and calendar, you'll see your relationships in one place, enriched with valuable data, including things like relationship strength. Adio lets you build Zapier-style automations, create powerful reports, and works for any go-to-market motion, from PLG to sales-led. Adio is designed for the next era of companies like yours. And companies like yours shouldn't have to deal with inflexible, one-size-fits-all CRMs. Join industry leaders like 11 Labs, Replicate, and Modal. Head to adio.com/productgrowth and you'll get 15% off your first year. That's attio.com/productgrowth. Tired of spending your days and nights managing all your paperwork processes with multiple tools? Good news. Today's podcast partner, Anvil, is a document AI that helps you build software for your paperwork processes at ludicrous speed. Turn your PDFs into templates in seconds. Anvil Document AI identifies input fields, assigns labels, and even prepares your document for signature. What if you could transform your templates into web forms in the blink of an eye and embed them into your application for a seamless user experience? The best part? Anvil separates your structured data from your PDFs so you can power your business with data, not documents, making it fully operational. The next time you're stuck processing PDFs, creating web forms, or gathering e-signatures, remember, you can do it faster with Anvil Document AI. So visit useanvil.com/Aakash. That's useanvil.com/Aakash. AAKASH. Don't get PDF'd. So let's move into how to succeed in interviews. You're preparing, now you're in the interview. What are the biggest mistakes people make?
During the interview,
Yep.
most likely the biggest mistake that I've seen is that when people come into an interview, they forget that the relevancy of the preparation of the resume, everything that has to be relevant, is also conducted in the interview. You call it out, earlier in this podcast. It's not just about the relevancy stops with the resume. You have to make your stories relevant. You have to come into the interview and say why you are a great fit for the role, right? So when you tell your stories from the, hey, tell me about yourself, all the way to tell me about a situation when X happened, it's all about how is my experience relevant to this job. And that's one of the biggest mistakes. I see people come into an interview and, like you said, then they start throwing facts and accomplishments and other things that are not very, but at least somewhat irrelevant to the job. And the problem or the challenge with that is that somebody with a more relevant background, or that at least tells a story that makes it seem more relevant to the job, is more likely to get that job, because hiring teams, hiring managers, they want someone who can come in and start helping them to win. Unless I would say maybe the only place where I've seen that they're a little bit more relaxed on the constraints is when you're finding that first PM role, that there's more, a little bit more leeway into, okay, we're going to look for transferable skills, which is still some degree of relevancy, but it's a little bit less strict, quote unquote. But the more senior you are into the role, the more relevant it has to be. So that relevancy is, one of the top things. The second mistake that I see is that, and this is where I think interviews have become a little bit of a cycle of we as a ecosystem in tech make them hard, and then you get folks with tens of years of experience who haven't interviewed in a while, trying to condense all of that experience into 10, 15, 20 minutes of an interview case question. And so the number two mistakes that I see people do, especially as they go more senior into the roles, is that they trust that just with their experience, they're going to be able to answer any questions, instead of understanding this is what they're going to ask me. This is the type of questions that I should prepare for. How do I get all my experience and put them in short, concise, structured ways? And that's what frameworks will help with. But not preparing adequately for the role, I think that's the second biggest mistakes that I've seen, that people sometimes they trust in their experience, which is great. They have a lot, but the interviews are only a half an hour, 45 minutes, sometimes an hour, a conversation, and trying to condense 10 years or 15 years of experience into 1 hour is really hard. It is very, very, very tough. And then, of course, we can break it down into specific interview types of questions and their mistakes. But to leave it in a third broad type of mistake, when it comes to case questions, most product managers forget that it's about thinking about products from the customer perspective. They forget that when you think about these case questions, like how would you improve something, or why did XYZ happen, or why did this company accomplish or did XYZ thing, they forget as product managers that it's all about the customer and solving problems for them while being relevant and helping the business side. And they jump into conclusions. They jump into, oh, here's what I think, or here's what I would do, or here's how I would change things, without walking the interviewer through very specific customer mindset about why they are making decisions, why they are making assumptions. So again, relevancy, not preparing well, and forgetting that it's all about customers and business. I think those are the three biggest categories of mistakes that I see all the time that people do in interviews.
Couldn't agree more. So let's move into one of the specific questions. For my money, it's the most common question. I, at least in my last interview cycle, when I was interviewing for a VP of product jobs, got it in 100% of interviews. Tell me about yourself. What's the right and wrong way to answer this question?
The wrong way to answer this question is to make it all about what you think is more important for them. And I know it sounds so weird, but if I come to this podcast, Aakash, and I start telling you, oh, let me tell you about yourself. And then I tell you, oh, you know what? When I was at Cisco, I did this great thing. And when I was at LinkedIn, I did this great other thing. But, oh, did I mention, by the way, that, when I was in Mexico, and I start jumping, everywhere and telling you random facts that I think are really cool. That's where people start getting into a place where it's like, I don't understand why you're here in this podcast or why you're here in this interview. If I'm in this podcast talking about resumes and talking about interview prep and talking about all of this, is because I need to provide the evidence that, hey, I've helped a lot of people. Like you mentioned, hey, I have a viral post on resumes, and I have people that come to me for resume advice. So I have not only, let's say, that credential, but I come here and tell you, hey, here's the things that I've done that are relevant to resumes and interviews that, help me to help others through your podcast. And it's exactly the same thing about Tell Me About Yourself. I can't come into a job in product management or any other function and then start throwing random facts that I think are interesting. That's the biggest mistake that I see, that people jump all over the place and they just tell, oh, here's, what I was responsible for at this company. Here's what I was responsible for at this other company. And then I'm here. And that's how they end their things. The right way to think about, tell me about yourself. Think about, there was a beginning of the process of getting into, for example, something like tech, something like product management, something around that idea of how do I connect what I wanted to do, many years ago to what I want to do next at your company, and how all the little pieces in my story are going to be connected. In other words, if I say, hey, I want to join this company, I'm going to start talking about, oh, you know what? For me, my story can start with, I moved in 2015 to the US. I did my MBA. I learned about product management for the first time. And that's what I realized, that I wanted to be a PM. So I ended up becoming a PM at Cisco. And then I'm going to start talking about things that are relevant to this job. For example, if this job is going to be more technical, then I can talk about the technical things that I learned at Cisco. Not individual technologies, but talk about, when I was at Cisco, that's when I started working with engineers. That's when I started working on more technical components like X, Y, and Z type of technologies. But then I joined Microsoft, and at Microsoft, I worked in AI and machine learning. And I got into the weeds of AI and ML, for example, learning about X, Y, and Z. But if I'm not applying, or if I'm not interviewing to a technical role, and I'm going more for, growth or I don't know, revenue, something that is completely not opposite, but at least very different from a tech PM role, I may talk less about AI and machine learning specifics, and I'll still mention them, of course, but I can talk more about, here's the things that I accomplished with the team, here's the metrics that we drove, here's the initiatives that are relevant to this specific position. So it's all about connecting one part of your story to the next one, of here's what I worked, here's the things that I learned on that job, here's the skills that I gained, here's how I applied them, and here's why I moved to my next role. And kind of start going role by role. Sometimes if you have 20 years of experience, you may not want to do this, otherwise it will take 10 minutes. But if you have, 10 years of experience, or if you've had 3, 4, maybe 5 jobs, you can do it quickly, just highlighting here's the things that I learned at this kind of role. Because I think that the theme of this whole session is it has to be relevant. It's all about being relevant. And that is how you get a good answer. You have to make it relevant. What skills did you learn that are relevant to the job? So I think you mentioned it, but the most common question you'll get is, tell me about yourself. It's also your opportunity to show why you have relevant skills. It's a hard question because you're going to get it all the time, and you may need to slightly change things every time. So don't take this question lightly, and prepare for it by literally thinking, what makes me a good candidate, a good fit for this specific role? I think that's what makes a good answer to tell me about yourself. And again, 2-3 minutes is perfectly fine. Don't go beyond that. If you need to summarize things, just compress things into one big blob of here's the things that I learned at these kind of jobs. But anyway, that's what I think it's a good answer to tell me about yourself.
Dear Lord, please do not go over 3 minutes. And yes, as an interviewer who has interviewed probably thousands of candidates over my career, most people go over 3 minutes. Please do not. All right. So tell me about yourself, you're going to get. Now, when it comes to other behavioral questions, I think it can bounce around. So I don't want to focus on like a specific one, but they tend to come of the flavors of like, tell me about a time when you had a conflict with your engineering partner. Tell me about a time when you had to step in and do work for your product analytics partner because they were on paternity leave or something like this, very common things that product managers face all the time. And if you talk to Meta or you talk to Amazon, they're like very prescriptive. They're like, use sort of like this STAR framework: situation, task, action, result. What is your general advice about behavioral interview questions? Should people be using STAR? And beyond STAR, how should they think about answering these questions correctly?
In general, I think that frameworks are a great way to answer, any sort of questions, but the framework itself doesn't matter. Meaning, recruiters, hiring managers, and interviewers are not going to care. Oh, we're having a conversation and you did not use star story. Sorry, you're out of the process. That's never going to happen. Frameworks are there to guide us, not to be strict and specific to the interview. I do recommend star simply because it's just easy, but more than that, or beyond just here's a framework and use it. The way that I recommend preparing for star stories or behavioral questions is to think about you're going to have an interview with Amazon. Amazon is famous for using their leadership principles in all of their interviews. In fact, unless something has changed, most of the interview is only behavioral questions, and they're going to grill you on the details, and they're going to ask you 1,000 follow-up questions. But thinking about their leadership principles is these leadership principles are not unique to them. I mean, customer obsession is the number one. Tell me about a company that is not obsessed about their customers, right? And I mean, sure, they may have some principles about like being frugal or being the best employer in the world. That is like, well, there are companies that are not the best employer in the world and they don't strive to be. But at least things like have a backbone, commit, disagree and commit, again, customer obsession. These kind of principles will apply to almost, if not every single business. So the way that I recommend is take, one or two leadership principles from Amazon. Except for example, if you're not going for a hiring manager position, there's one about hiring the best employees, which you can completely ignore. But take one or two leadership principles and try to create stories around those. And what's going to happen, what you're going to realize is that if you have about 6 or 7 stories, you can cover most, if not all, of the leadership principles. What's going to happen in an interview is because you don't know, like you said, you don't know which questions you're going to get asked. What is going to change is the focus on the story. For example, if you ask me about a conflict with a customer, then I can use one story and focus on what about this customer? What made it a hard interaction? What was complex about the situation with the customer? And then if in another interview in another company you ask me, hey, tell me about a difficult decision that you had to run by your manager. Maybe it's the same story. The thing that changes is maybe I don't focus too much on what made it so complex with the customer, and maybe I focus much more on this is what the decision was hard, and this is why I need to convince my manager of something. And so now the shift of the focus of the story shifts to be more aligned to whatever the question was. Preparing for leadership principles for Amazon, I think, gives you an idea of what are things that matter to any company. Again, like being obsessed about customers. It gives you focus on these are the 6 or 7 stories that at least I should prepare. Preparing for these interviews, if you prepare for having leadership principles from Amazon, you're going to have these combinations of 2, sometimes 1, sometimes 2 leadership principles. You'll have answers to 6 or 7 questions, and then depending on what the question they ask you, you're going to shift the focus of the story. And again, the most important thing about here is that it has to be a relevant story, right? To show what you're interviewing for, to show that you have the skills that you're interviewing for that specific position. And the second thing in terms of preparation is you have to understand that you need to answer the question. I know it sounds very obvious, but I've asked a lot of people, hey, tell me about a time where you had a conflict with an engineer on your team, which, by the way, is one of the most probably asked questions in an interview for product management. And their stories are, go along these lines of, there was this engineer, we disagreed on X, and so we decided to, have a meeting and then talk about it, and we solved the issue. And so now we went and did all these big projects. And I'm like, hold on, you're telling me that you convinced your engineer of something just by sitting in a room and talking? Well, no, actually we did all these, 20 other things. And I'm like, yes, that's what you need to talk about. If the question is about, tell me about a conflict with your engineer, don't tell me that you sat in a room and that's it. Tell me all the things. How do you convince them? What data do you use? They probably didn't believe you at first. So how do you convince them? It was maybe a back and forth. Make sure that you answer the question. And then probably number 3 in terms of preparation. So 1 is leadership principles. 2 is make sure that you answer the question. And then number 3, I would say it's a mix of make sure that you're not, talking for 10 minutes, right? So being concise, being making sure that you're being structured is going to be the key to make sure that both you and your interviewer understand and follow your story. It's very simple things such as first I did this, second I did that, or breaking it into pieces by saying, well, you know what, there was 3 things that I did. I started with blah 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 whatever. Next, I did this other thing, and finally, I did whatever. Because I've also had people who almost as if you were reading a paragraph with no punctuation whatsoever, and you get lost in the middle, and you're like, wait, hold on, what is going on? So as an interviewer, it's really hard. It's really hard to just understand the story. And so if you follow these 3 things, it's just going to be way easier to answer any behavioral question that they throw at you. And if you're interviewing with Amazon, then it's going to be a little bit harder because they're going to ask you 10 follow-up questions over any behavioral interview question that they give you first.
And I wouldn't call it like a recovery, but I want to illustrate a technique that you just used in this podcast, which is you kind of recovered the structure before your third point because it was getting to like 1 minute 30, 2 minutes, and I might have just forgotten. You refreshed me on the structure and then you went to your third point. And I think that was a really effective example of the point you were making. So that was really well done. Now I want to move into case interviews. Case interviews, if I had to put my money on it, most experienced PMs, they aren't disqualifying themselves based on behavioral, especially after a little bit of practice, because they're experienced. They've actually done this stuff. They figured it out. There's not so many like gotchas ultimately when it comes to those things if you've managed to stay in the PM career for a while. The case interview is a different beast. I mean, it's just unlike the job, honestly, because you're going through things so fast. What case interviews have you seen employed at big tech companies?
I actually think that even beyond tech companies or big tech companies, most companies, except for very, very early startups, most companies are adopting very similar case style questions. If we had this conversation maybe 2 years ago, I would say, you know what, some of the most common ones or the most typical questions are going to be product design questions. Product design, like, we've seen it since the Cracking the PM interview book, was in place. Like, how would you design an alarm clock for someone who's blind, right? Maybe 3-4 years ago, maybe a little bit more, is like that was the typical question. But I think things are shifting a little bit to be more take-home assignments. And I've seen more and more and more and more take-home assignments. And we can talk about those in a moment. But to your question, I think if you grab any book, if you grab any blog post, any article, you're going to find that product design question is still one of the most asked questions. And it's all about how you grab all your experience as a product manager and then put all of that together in a 15 to 25 minute answer that has to do with creating new products, improving existing products, or designing new products for whether it's a company or a made-up scenario or made-up constraints. But it's all about how do you take an open-ended question like, how would you design an alarm clock for someone who's blind? Or I've been asked in different interviews. For example, when I was at Microsoft a few years ago, they asked me, how would you design a warning system for when you are in a tunnel from going from Seattle to Redmond? And I was like, okay, that's interesting. Let's go and do it, right? And it was never about like, oh, you know what, this specific technology or this specific thing. It's all about thinking, if I'm a product manager, how do I approach this problem? Well, I have a goal in mind that we want to achieve with, even if it's an alarm system for a tunnel, but I have a goal in mind. Then I have my users, and who are going to be the people who are going to be either using my app or my platform or my website or my product, or are going to be affected by it. And these people are going to have pain points that I'm going to solve through a product. And then I need to put my product manager hat on once I identify who are my users and my customers and their pain points, to solve those pain points, to really think about, if I have this product or if I need to design a product, like in the case of, you know, a tunnel and an alarm system, if I have to design the alarms, how can I best design them to solve the pain points that my customers have? And once I understand that that's, you know, a process, then we can think about, you know, many other parts of the conversation that could go anywhere into, all right, but here's how I prioritize, here's how I measure success, the go-to-market, the risks. But I think the number one key thing here is that there's no specific framework. The one that I just shared is the one that I use, but there's no best framework. There's no the only framework for any of these questions. It's much more about making it a dialogue, a conversation, why are we solving this together? Why does it matter that we solve this? So product design is probably one of the most typical questions that you'll get. Take-home assignments, like I said, is this, suddenly there's a surge in take-home assignments, and there's many ways in which a take-home assignment can present itself. Sometimes it's, hey, the team is trying to solve X. How would you approach it, right? And you're not gonna have all the data or all the information, but we want to see with this, you know, piece of information, how would you, as a product manager, would approach it? There's also made-up scenarios that is like, hey, this is a company-wide scenario for all product managers. Go and solve it. Pretty standard cases, right? And so take-home assignments, I would say, are kind of becoming the new normal. And while there's no specific framework to solve them, it's really about thinking, again, like a product manager. What is the problem that we're trying to solve? Who are the customers? Who are my competitors? Who are supplying us this? How are we approaching this whole situation? And so take-home assignments is kind of becoming the new king of not necessarily just interview questions, but interview processes. There's a few other flavors of interview questions that I can just touch on really quickly, because I don't think I've seen them as often as these first two. But it's, from strategy questions like, why did, this company acquire this other company, or what do you think, this startup should do next? All the way to execution questions around, hey, we have this product. How do we measure success of this product? So walk us through metrics, right? Is give us information about, do you understand what is the goal of products and how they are measured in their success? And part of it is because they want to see that you understand the process of creating products and not just creating, features for the sake of, being cool features, but is really understanding how do they affect the business. And then some real life scenarios that in a question sound impossible or improbable, but I actually experienced this when I was at LinkedIn, is, hey, Monday morning, your metric is down by 15%. What do you do? And we spent the whole week in a room trying to figure out what actually happened at LinkedIn to figure out why was the metric down. It happens, and so they want to see, all right, as a product manager, what are all the different tools that you have available to you that you're going to implement at that time. And so I think the common theme here is that while some of these questions may seem wild and completely made up, like how would you design an emergency system for a tunnel, it's all about testing. Can you bring your product management skills into these questions? Can you answer questions like a product manager would do on the job? And so there's no perfect framework. There's no one single framework. It's all about a dialogue. It's all about making sure that you show that you understand the process of creating features and products, and that is not about making it cool, but it's about solving a customer problem that have a real need. and how is that going to positively affect the business, and all of that in just sometimes 10, sometimes 25 minutes.
Well said. And that take-home assignment, I have seen a meteoric ascent of that. I would say that when I got my job at a firm, I maybe did like 1 or 2 take-home assignments out of the like 11 or 12 processes that I was a part of. And this time around for my job at Apollo, almost every job had a take-home assignment. So part of it was seniority. I was going for more senior roles. So they're more common in more senior roles, but also just over time, they become so much more common. And the number one question I get about take-home assignments is all of my competition is probably doing way more hours than they suggest, right? When they give you that assignment, they say, oh yeah, spend 3 hours on this. Oh yeah, spend 6 hours on this. If they're aggressive, they might even say spend 20 and we'll pay you for it. But everybody has a sneaking suspicion their competition is spending like 4 times more amount of time on that assignment so that they can create something just amazing. What is your take on that? How is someone who's already an overworked PM most likely supposed to deal with the increasing demands of these take-home assignments?
It's hard. I'm going to start with that. It's really hard because this is a combination of something that I was saying earlier, which is, can I sleep well knowing that I did X meaning how much effort and time I put in the presentation? And sometimes the answer is, I just cannot do anything else. And that's it. You have to live with that. Other times is like, I want to do more, but it's supposed to be 3 hours. So you wake up in the middle of the night and you crunch a few hours more. So I don't think there's a perfect way to do it, and which is unfortunate, and it's a reality, right? You said it very, very, very correctly. Just because they tell you it's 3 hours doesn't mean you don't think, oh, but somebody's putting 6 or 12 or 50 hours, right? And there's no perfect answer to this. In my opinion, where you should spend most of the time, whether it's 1 hour or 3 hours, or if you decide to put more than that into the presentation, is, again, making sure that you answer the question in the most relevant way possible. If your presentation is not the most, colorful and full of design type of presentation, I think it's okay. But as a product manager, if you only have 3 hours and that's all you can put into the presentation, it's all about how do you tell a good story that is relevant to what they're asking for. I've had people who, friends actually, who reach out to me and say, hey, I've got this, case presentation. And they tell me this after their interviews. And I'm like, how did it go? And it's like, well, it was not great because, they were asking me, XYZ questions and I didn't have answers for that. I'm like, oh, was that a surprise? They were like, no, you know what? At the end, I kind of reread the instructions and the questions were there. I just didn't think it was going to be, as relevant. So things like that happen. And you would think that, well, the instructions are there. Why don't people just do it? It's the same thing with resumes. The job description is there. Why do people don't tailor it to the resume? So to the job description, sorry. So it's hard. The conclusion is it's hard. And all you have to think about is if you have 1 hour or 3 or 10 or 15 or doesn't matter, you're going to do well if you make it relevant, if you answer the questions. It is not about how colorful your presentation is. That's what I can say. But very unfortunately, my prediction, and I'm definitely so bad at predictions, but my prediction is that if we see more and more and more and more take-home assignments, even though they say 3 hours, people will start putting a lot more effort into that, raising the bar, the quality, which is, by the way, what we have seen in interviews. Interviews become harder, not because employers want to make it harder, but because people over-prepare. So if everybody is, at the same stage, you need to raise the bar so that then you filter out those that, don't meet that higher standard. So we'll see how it evolves.
Okay. And then I think the case interview question that people are most scared about, because they do product execution on a day-to-day basis. They do some product design, or at least they work with their designers on a day-to-day basis. They might even do some of these other question types that you hear about these days, mergers and acquisitions, though. Those are much harder. Or what would you do as the CEO of Snapchat? Yeah. Those are much harder because it's not exactly the typical purview of a PM unless you're at a very small company. If you're at a big company, though, you're generally focused on products, not on the CEO level merger and acquisition level questions. So what is your advice to PMs? How should they handle these tough questions that require them to think way above their level?
Number one, it's about making it a dialogue, meaning, yes, they ask you the question, but that doesn't mean that it's you speaking in a monologue for 10 minutes. It's all about going back and forth between, hey, here's an exploration I want to do. I want to think about A, B, and C, for example. I want to think about who are we as a company, who are our customers, what are our competitors doing. Talk about that and make a pause and say, hey, Aakash, here's my conclusion to these 3 things. And I'm thinking of exploring these other 3 or 4 ideas. What do you think? And sometimes interviewers will be like, oh, sounds great. Just go ahead. Other times they'll push back. They'll take you somewhere else. And by making it a dialogue, it just takes a little bit of the pressure off, but also you show your interviewer that you have a structured way of approaching these cases because they don't have an answer. In fact, I truly believe that 99% of these cases are made up. Meaning on the spot, they're like, all right, boom, here's a question. Go for it, right? And interviewers don't have an answer. They're not expecting you. For example, in consulting, so McKinsey, Bain, BCG, they're famous for saying, oh, Aakash, you mentioned the right keyword. Here's the spreadsheet. Now, here's the data that you were looking for, right? It doesn't happen in tech. It doesn't happen in product management. So thinking about that structured approach, and when it comes to strategy question, at least I'm not a CEO. I've never been a CEO. But if I get a question about being a CEO, I need to think about a CEO doesn't care about a specific feature, unless we're talking about a super small startup. But if you're talking about Snapchat or whoever, they don't care about my feature as a product manager. They care about bigger things. So I need to think about bigger things. What are bigger things? Well, my competitors, my customers, trends in the industry, changes in the market, new technologies, right? I'm thinking about that level. Typically, a common question is, you're the chief product officer for X company, right? What do you do? As the CPO, I may not care about that specific individual feature, but I care overall about where is the product going? How do I see the product in 5 years? So stepping away from that product manager, individual contributor level and thinking higher level, again, customer, competitors, trends in the industry, trends in technology. And one of the natural questions, by the way, is going to be, well, what if I don't know? Here's where the problem lies. If you're applying for, say, AI and machine learning roles, the interviewer is not expecting you that you know the specific model that, is going to be used in certain techniques, but they expect that you have a notion of what is happening in the AI and machine learning world. So for these big questions, you really have to think big, and you have to abstract from whatever you've read, whatever new technology trends you're aware of. Sometimes even if you follow someone on TikTok that gives you tech trends and tech news, sometimes that is good enough to say, hey, by the way, I've heard that X, Y, and Z is happening. So I think as a CPO, I would think about, blah. There's no perfect answer to this. There's no specific framework, but thinking big, stepping away from that individual contributor, I think that is one good way to have a conversation with the interviewer about what would the CPO of XYZ company would do next.
Okay. So let's move into becoming an AI product manager. As I've written about, I don't think AI has disrupted PM. In fact, I think it's helped PM. You know why? Because I work with a lot of PMs who they might have gotten laid off. Who knows? They might have gotten pipped and let go. They've had these negative situations in their lives. And where are they ending up despite that turmoil? AI PM jobs. I feel like it's lifting up the whole industry. Like these companies, they're doing well. Investors are funding them. And so they're hiring PMs and it's been a positive boon for my soul. So I'm curious, like if some PM wants to get into AI PM, but let's say they haven't exactly done AI PM. As you said, AI PM often tends to be a little bit more technical. It tends to be a little bit less about the UX and more about models or data or working with researchers, a constituency that we've barely even talked about in this podcast yet. How should that mid-career PM transition into these AI PM jobs that seem to be everywhere?
The number one thing to understand is the difference between a PM working on whatever types of features that are atypical. I have my developers with me and my user researcher and designers and go to market and so on and so forth, compared to now I have data scientists in my team. What do we do and how is it different? Understanding the difference is key because you realize that and there's a couple flavors within AI ML roles about like, are you more of a platform type of PM for AI ML or more of the consumer, meaning you create models and then you consume them in somewhere else. But regardless of that, when you work with data scientists, it's a very, very different experience than working with developers and creating, say, a mobile app. And the biggest reason for that is because the world of data science, it's all about data. It's all about from how do you get this data? Can you use this data? Can you use this data as is, or do you need to change it somehow because of privacy, legal, ethical, tons of constraints, all the way to how are we going to launch this and either A, gain trust from users. I think we've seen a lot of companies get into trouble, like Adobe, with like, oh, by the way, suddenly everything that you do is ours because of Gen AI. And it's like, wait, what do you mean, right? So even if that's not what they intended, things like that can have, catastrophic outcomes. So working with data scientists is very, 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 very different. So number one, understanding the difference between working with data scientists and working with a typical development team. Another thing to think about is you have to, yes, get more technical. And now in all of my 6 or 7 years in AI machine learning, 6 actually, AI machine learning, you are not going to code. I have never coded, here's a decision tree and that's it. But understanding the different types of algorithms, how they work, what is the metrics, because machine learning is a lot about metrics, and understanding what to do with those metrics and how to present them and how to tell stories with that. That's what makes it key for an AI ML PM to make decisions. And that's why you need to become more technical. Understanding how data scientists operate and what are all the things to go from here's 2 lines of code that will make my algorithm all the way to here's a production level of code that is going to power marketing for a product recommendation campaign or a churn analysis to determine who to target with rewards and stuff like that. So understanding the technical aspect of it is going to be key. And there's courses, there's plenty of things that you can do for that. And then a third one is understanding all of the ethical and legal things around AI machine learning, and you don't have to be an expert on that. Probably if you work in a big tech or large organization, you're going to have people specialized in that. But understanding that just because you have data available doesn't mean you can use it. And just because you have a team of AI developers or data scientists and machine learning engineers doesn't mean you should use AI. And just because you can use AI doesn't mean that you should use AI. So understanding how and when to use AI machine learning, I think that's also key to an AI ML product manager. And I'll give you a very brief story on that. I once joined a team who they wanted to use AI, no matter what we did is like, we should use AI. And in the end, the requirements or the problem we were trying to solve was to help users to have the correct address of their home to deliver XYZ. And after going in circles, for days about like how do we enable AI to help people to get the right address when they input in the system, the question started to become, do we really need AI for this? Have we spent the last few days to do AI? I was brand new in the team. I was completely new. This was an old job. I was brand new, and I was just starting to understand and listen. And is those first 30 days where you're like, what the hell is happening? Just trying to understand what's going on in the organization. But after a few days, the question didn't become how do we use AI. It was more, do we need AI for this? And of course, the conclusion was no. There's already a lot of things that can be done. So understanding the difference between data scientists and developers, making sure that you go technical, and understanding how and when to use AI, I think that's what makes it key for someone to start getting into AI and machine learning. And we can certainly talk about, techniques and projects and all of that. But I think at high level, those three are, big things that anybody who wants to go into AI should understand.
So one of your pieces of advice was become more technical. And you yourself have pursued a master's in computer science with an AI ML focus. I think you've gone as technical as one could go. Like after that degree, you could potentially just go become an AI engineer if you preferred. Should PMs be doing that? And if they're not, or if they don't have the resources to do that, should they be considering a part-time online one? Or what other resources that are maybe not as extreme as that should they be considering? And what are your favorites?
I'll go back to the example that I said about students when I was a math teacher. I tried courses, and I found that I would put a video, and 5 minutes later, I'll be like, all right, look at that. I got a notification about something. Let's go and explore what is that notification. And then click on something else and then be like, oh, shoot, I was watching a video. Let me go back to it. And I never learned. And that was just me, not because the content was bad. And so I did this program at Georgia Tech. It's one of the cheapest, not necessarily cheap in general, but the cheapest master's program I've ever seen. At that time, Microsoft, they have a program where they help you with continuous education. So it helped me pay part of it. And I realized that I needed someone, in this case, a homework and a deadline to teach me that I need to put attention and focus on that. So it took me about 3 years to complete the program. And it was painful, but definitely worth it. There's a lot of places to start. Kaggle is a fantastic website that teaches you from the basic of Python all the way to machine learning, and go through the journey as a data scientist. They have a lot of free resources. They have competitions for you to practice. So I think Kaggle is one of my favorite ones to learn the basics about machine learning in general. There's honestly, when it comes to the theory part of machine learning, here's where it gets a little bit complex, because every course you're going to find is going to talk a lot more, or rather mostly on the math on machine learning, on the statistics of machine learning. But as a product manager, while yes, you should know the math, it is not going to be the bread and butter of your job. So I honestly haven't seen a great course that gives you that product management experience. It's something that I've been thinking about, something that I've been chatting with other PMs like Mary Lee, and we're cooking something, but it's still pretty much a thought on how we make this happen. But you, as a product manager, go through the technical aspect of it. Kaggle, fantastic place. Go through the theory part of it, the math, but don't worry if suddenly it gets too deep too fast. And then it's all about how you implement it on your job, on your side projects, and gain a little bit of that experience, because you will not get online that part of, okay, as a product manager, how do I, use this in my day-to-day? that's where I feel there are a few resources missing. But hopefully soon, and we'll see. Especially since ChatGPT, the world of AI is again hot. It kind of cooled down for a little bit until ChatGPT.
Okay. And what is your future forecast? I know that you mentioned you're not the best forecaster, but amongst people listening, you're probably one of the more experienced AI PMs, 6 years of AI PM under your belt now. That's towards the top end available. How do you see the future of this subdiscipline? Is it set to continue growing at a rocket-like pace as it has in the last year? Is it going to slowly level off? What is the kind of future for AI product management?
Companies like, at the forefront, AWS and Google and OpenAI, so Microsoft, you see that the innovation in terms of new models and more powerful models doesn't stop. And I don't think it's going to slow down, anytime soon. That being said, you have, top innovators in terms of companies that are quickly adopting those models. But then you have a long tail of companies who are just trying to understand, how do I use, LLMs to do X, right? And there's not enough people in the world, especially product managers, who know about AI and machine learning. So I think you said it beautifully, which is...
This episode is brought to you by WorkOS. If you're building a SaaS app, at some point your customers will start asking for enterprise features like SAML authentication and SCIM provisioning. That's where WorkOS comes in, making it fast and painless to add enterprise features to your app. Their APIs are easy to understand so that you can ship quickly and get back to building other features. Today, hundreds of companies are already powered by WorkOS, including ones you probably know like Vercel, Webflow, and Loom. WorkOS also recently acquired Warrant, the fine-grained authorization service. Warrant's product is based on a groundbreaking authorization system called Zanzibar, which was originally designed for Google to power Google Docs and YouTube. This enables fast authorization checks at enormous scale while maintaining a flexible model that can be adapted to even the most complex use cases. If you're currently looking to build role-based access control or other enterprise features like single sign-on SCIM or user management, you should consider WorkOS. It's a drop-in replacement for Auth0 and supports up to 1 million monthly active users for free. Check it out at workos.com/Aakash to learn more. That's workos.com/Aakash.
This is a great time in product management because of AI and machine learning, right? But at the same time, it has to be done right. Just by taking one, Coursera course is not going to get you qualified for an AI ML role. But I do think that it is not going to stop growing. I don't think it'll continue growing this fast for a long time. But I do feel that until I don't want to say most, but at least a lot of product managers become savvy in AI machine learning and learn about AI machine learning, I don't think it's going to stop, because more and more companies will keep adopting AI and machine learning. Previously, just to make the comparison of why I'm saying this, I think most of the AI and ML roles were purely handled by engineers and data scientists, where marketing team would go and say, hey, I need a term prediction to, understand who to target. And that was the requirement. And, data scientists will execute. And now we see that more and more products actually want to surface AI and machine learning. And while engineers and data scientists are awesome at what they do, sometimes they could struggle with, all right, how do I make this a reality? And how do I actually make this, surface this in a product? And that's where product managers come in. But you cannot, without AI machine learning experience, or at least knowledge, you cannot come in and say, here's how we do AI and machine learning, because there's so many implications. So I do think it'll keep growing, but I also do think that product managers need to keep up with that trend. Otherwise, it's going to be not a great experience for either the companies or for the product manager trying to, be like, fake it till you make it. It only takes you so far, that aspect of it.
Yeah. You don't want to get yourself into a job that you're not ready for, folks listening. So I know we spent an hour and a half on interview prep, but try to do it for something that you're actually ready to take on. Exactly. All right. We're moving into the lightning round. Are you ready?
Let's do it.
All right. What's something very few people know about you?
Oh, oh my God, this is supposed to be fast, and I don't know what people don't know about me. Let me see. Oh, I know. This is a super, super, super obscure fact, random fact about me. When I was younger, my voice was used in a video game.
Video game name?
So you see how in FIFA games, whenever you're playing a soccer match, there's people chanting in the background, the cheers, the song of the team. Me and my friends, we recorded most, if not all, of the songs or the chanting for Mexican teams. This was a long, long, long time ago, so I don't think they're using it anymore. But for at least a couple of years, my voice was in FIFA.
Wow, that is so cool as a kid. I think that would have made my life when I first played the game and heard myself.
Yeah. They didn't pay us anything, but it was super fun.
What's your favorite interview question to ask of product management candidates?
My favorite interview question to ask. I don't ask it as often, but one of the things that I like to ask is, how would you explain, pick a concept, whether it's machine learning, cryptocurrency, IoT, cloud, how would you explain that to either your grandparents or, a 5-year-old kid? One of my favorite questions to ask, just to understand, can you abstract something complex and explain it in simple terms? Because as a PM, you're going to face that. And so can you think about that? So that's one of my favorite questions.
Love that one. What's your favorite book that has lessons for product or growth people?
It is not a product manager book, but The Design of Everyday Things. I absolutely love that book. Made me obsessed about how badly designed the doors are and how everything that I look at is like, is this good design or not? I absolutely love that book. I think every PM should read it. And I know it's not the typical PM book, but I think that it really helps you understand, is this something that users will find intuitive, or is this a door that is not going to work? And if you've read that book, you know why we hate doors.
Yes, the Norman door.
Yeah.
What's a newsletter, because we're all subscribed to a lot, that you actually anticipate hitting your inbox?
Oh, so I definitely love your newsletter. It's really, really fun to read. That's a very interesting question. So besides your newsletter, I mean, I am subscribed to a few other newsletters like Powell's and sometimes Bart also shares, some golden nuggets. I have to make a confession. I'm neither a big podcast or newsletter type of guy, because I prefer reading either posts or YouTube videos or sometimes books, but mostly posts and YouTube. I'm kind of like, I need information, in short, concise way. So newsletters, I'm subscribed to few. Podcasts, I'm subscribed to few as well.
Okay. What's a new product you've started using and enjoy?
Oh, new product. Interesting. What is the new product, the latest product that I've used? I'm trying to think of something exciting, because the latest product that I used that I enjoyed, but it's definitely not exciting, is I moved to a new place and I realized I have smart things at home. And so I can control my oven and, some other stuff with an app, which is, pretty fun in itself, but it's definitely not podcast worthy fun. I will have to think about a better one, but that was my honest, boring answer of the latest product that I've used. But I mean, outside of that, I've been using, the latest ChatGPT or the latest Google Gemini and stuff like that, which is, pretty impressive. But in terms of app itself, my boring answer is Smart Things by Samsung.
Smart Things is awesome, guys. It's a smart home app, and he made it sound boring, but it's actually really, really well done. And what's probably most interesting about Smart Things is it has mastered the game of integrations. It literally, when you click on like shades, you have to scroll through like 10,000 different types of light shades that it can integrate with.
Yeah.
My entire home is hooked up through the Smart Things app. So please, Samsung, don't get hacked. Awesome.
No, we love the app. It's a boring answer for a product manager of AI machine learning in a podcast, but it's a beautiful app.
Yes. We're almost at our time here, so we have to ask about failures. What's one particularly memorable product failure that you learned from?
When I was at LinkedIn, I was a product manager in the LinkedIn Talent Solution, which is the team that focuses on both job seekers and hiring, which is companies posting jobs and all that. And I was on the job seeker side, so helping job seekers. And my failure was that I became obsessed with how do we make the job seekers easier and better, and how do we help them go from I'm interested in this job all the way to landing that job, and what resources can we give them. And so I had this massive idea on how to make that happen. And my failure was that I never did a good job and I went through 5 reorgs, and that didn't help either. But and I'm not kidding. Well, 4 reorgs, and my failure was that even though I tied these different initiatives or different parts of the initiatives to metrics, I didn't focus mostly on figuring out. Hold on, before we come up with these ideas and these metrics, what are really the key North Stars that we need to hit that then will break into OKRs that then we can contribute to. And it doesn't mean that my ideas didn't fit or were completely radical, but it's just the impact that and this was, very, very early on, the impact that I proposed was not as big. So I had to redesign my entire strategy into something brand new, because even though from an objective perspective, sounds amazing, helping job seekers, I couldn't tie that strategy to the OKRs that matter the most. And that's what made my strategy fail, and had to go back to the drawing board to create something that will actually achieve both goals, even if it was from a different perspective.
That's a beautiful lesson. Thank you for being honest and sharing that with all of us. Where can people find you online, and how can they help you?
LinkedIn is probably where I'm most active. So LinkedIn, just search for Diego Granados. YouTube for sure. I have a website, pmdiego.com. So hopefully easy to find me. How can people help me? Help me understand how to help you. I mean, one of the things that I love about the PM community is I think it's one of those communities where everybody is helping each other, and I see a lot of people just contributing to, hey, product management is not this mystical role where it's impossible to get into, and rather it's, this very awesome profession that, could be hard to understand, and we're here to help you. So reach out if you need help, reach out if you have questions, reach out if there's content that you're like, hey, Diego, would love to learn more about, AI and ML product manager. How do I become one? Because those things help me understand you, my customer, on what are the problems that you have, and then content creators like Aakash and myself, then we can go and be like, oh, here's information that is going to help you to achieve those goals. And so I don't know, I've been contributing to the PM community for about 3-4 years now, and it's been an awesome journey, and I love the people in it.
All right, listeners, let's send Diego at least 100 messages. Let's fill up his inbox with how he can help us. Diego, thank you so much for being here.
Thank you so much for inviting me. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you so much for listening. If you found this valuable, you can subscribe to the show on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast app. Also, please consider giving us a rating or leaving a review, as that really helps other listeners find out about the podcast. You You can find all the past episodes or learn more about the show at product-growth.com. See you in the next episode.